Thanks for speaking with us again.
My pleasure.
You're Julian Assange's legal defence in Australia. We spoke to you at the rally last week and there's been quite a few developments since. What are the major ones?
Well, of course, the main development is that Julian Assange has now been bailed. He now has his freedom, despite resistance by, we're not sure whether it's the British or the Swedish, in appealing the original decision. So we're glad that the rule of law has been imposed, and that is that there were good reasons why he should have been released on bail. The court was satisfied that he was never really a flight risk, and that was there was no evidence to support that.
The bail has been pretty extraordinary. How much has he paid with the help of friends?
I think it's about $360,000. That's represented by 7 sureties, because what the court says basically is it's not just a question of raising the financial amount and depositing that amount. Surety has 2 roles. One is to provide financial security, which will be forfeited if Mr Assange doesn't answer his bail.
Right.
But the second role of a surety is to ensure the person attends court.
Okay.
So that's a secondary role that they have to fulfil.
As you mentioned earlier, there's a bit of confusion over who was resisting bail, whether it was Sweden or Britain. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, logically it should have come from Sweden. They're the ones who want to interrogate Mr Assange rather than the British, but the Swedes washed their hand of it. I suppose that what it does do is it's symptomatic of the confusion that is around this case as to how and why and who's pursuing the charges.
Yeah, and I guess that's a bit of a mystery at this point.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mystery, and remembering, of course, our main game that we know we have to defend is whether he's going to be extradited to the US.
Right.
So we're reassured today, for instance, that the Australian Federal Police have said we can't identify any charges, perhaps despite what Julia Gillard said and despite what Robert McClellan said initially.
Yeah.
I note that they've retreated from that position,
Yeah.
and they've retreated from that position pretty significantly because there's been such an outpouring of support for Mr Assange in the community generally. Politicians, judicial officers, people right throughout the community, pensioners, young people, everyone. It's really resonated right through the community.
Have you had a chance to speak with Julian?
No, we haven't, but the WikiLeaks Australian representatives have. And let me say this, he was aware of the support here at the State Library, the various rallies and demonstrations, and he's been reinforced by that level of support. It's really emboldened him to continue with the important work that he's done in terms of making government more accountable and more transparent.
So he has been released on bail, and the federal, like you've said, the Australian Federal Police haven't identified a law that he's broken. Are you feeling more optimistic about him not being imprisoned for the next couple of years?
I'm always the eternal optimist, and I would hope that he will be okay. But this is just the first step in a very long march. And okay, he's been released on bail. He hasn't been charged with any offence, and yet for a person that's not been charged with any offence, to place them, for instance, in solitary confinement was a very unusual step. We have to see whether he's going to be charged. That's the next step, and then the extradition battle one would expect to the US. I would think that because there's a worldwide campaign to support him, journalist community, those that believe in freedom of speech, those that believe in accountable government, a pretty powerful group of people, and I would hope that the US will drop their plans or their campaign to have him return to the US to face God knows what.
And are you in touch with Julian's other legal defence teams? And
Yes, we
do you
are.
know what their main tasks are right now? What are they working on?
Well, their main task is going to be to resist the extradition, to say that there's no real basis in law for him to be extradited. Just to give you an overview of the charges that he may face in Sweden, that is that he's had initially consensual sexual relations with a person, invited into her premises, shared the bed with her, had consensual sex, and then some hours later said not to have had consensual sex. In a context where the complaint was withdrawn, then reinstated, then when it was further revealed that that same complainant had identified a 7-step revenge program on her own computer or Twitter. So really the bona fides or the genuineness of those complaints is really up in the air.
Thanks for speaking with us again,
you.
Rob.